"You don't own this lake." That's what the HOA president screamed at me the morning I moved in. I was standing on my own property, 5 acres, with a private waterfront deed explicitly excluding HOA covenants, holding the paperwork in my hand. She didn't care. Within a week, she'd posted violation notices citing a non-existent attorney named Michael Richardson, who'd never practiced in this county. My naval intelligence training kicked in. I cross-referenced the signature against HOA records and confirmed forgery, then installed covert cameras covering every entry point. When she slapped a $1,500 fine on my gate, I knew it was time to respond. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. The morning air smelled like pine and wet earth when I first stood at the edge of my new property. The lake stretched out before me, still as glass sunlight glinting off the surface. 5 acres of waterfront land outside the Pinewood Hollow HOA line, verified, certified, and mine. After 15 years in naval intelligence, I'd learned one thing: always verify the paperwork. This was supposed to be my quiet retirement. I should have known better. She appeared around 9:30 that first Saturday morning, walking up the gravel path like she owned it. Mid-50s, blonde hair pulled back tight, wearing a cream-colored blazer despite the heat. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm and had the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. I was standing near the water's edge, measuring where I might eventually build a dock, when I heard her voice cut through the stillness. "Good morning. You must be the new owner." I turned around, keeping my expression neutral. Everything about her body language spoke of control: shoulders, squared, pauses, calculated, chin tilted just enough to claim the space between us. "That's right," I said. "Fletcher Dalton, just moved in last week." She extended her hand with the efficiency of a corporate recruiter. "Marlene Kinsley. I'm the president of the Pinewood Hollow Homeowners Association. Welcome to the neighborhood." I shook her hand briefly and stepped back, giving myself space. "Thanks, it's a beautiful area." Her smile tightened. "It is. We work very hard to keep it that way. That's actually why I'm here. I wanted to introduce myself and go over some community guidelines before you start making any changes to the property." I felt the first prickle of warning at the base of my skull, the same instinct that had kept me alive in places where one wrong word could end a mission. Community guidelines. I kept my tone light, curious. "I appreciate the thought, but this property isn't part of the HOA. I made sure of that before I bought it." Marlene's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in her eyes. "I understand there may have been some confusion during the sale, but the HOA actually has jurisdiction over all properties adjacent to the lake. It's part of our founding covenants. The lake itself is considered a shared community resource." I let the silence hang for a moment, watching her. She believed what she was saying. That was the dangerous part. She wasn't lying. She genuinely thought she had authority here. "I've reviewed the covenants," I said carefully. "My property predates the HOA by 12 years. The lake is privately owned and always has been. I have the deed and survey map if you'd like to see them." Her expression hardened. The polite mask slipped just enough to show the steel underneath. "Mr. Dalton, I've been president of this HOA for 8 years. I know every property line in this community. You can't simply build whatever you want here without approval. The aesthetic standards exist for a reason." I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the Photos app, finding the image of the survey map I'd photographed for exactly this kind of conversation. "This is the official county survey. The red line shows the HOA boundary. My property, these 5 acres, sits entirely outside that line, 200 meters outside to be exact." Marlene glanced at the screen, and I watched her jaw tighten. She didn't look long, didn't zoom in, didn't ask questions. She just pulled her portfolio tighter against her side and lifted her chin another inch. "Surveys can be challenged. Property lines can be disputed. What I'm telling you as a courtesy is that any construction or modification you make to this waterfront will require an HOA architectural review. That includes docks, decks, fencing, or landscaping changes. I'll have our attorney send you the formal request forms." The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I'd been in enough hostile negotiations to know when someone was testing boundaries. This wasn't about property lines or covenants. This was about control, about whether I'd submit or push back. I chose my words carefully, keeping my voice level and professional. "I appreciate you stopping by, Ms. Kinsley, but I won't be submitting any requests to the HOA. This is private property. If you have legal concerns, you're welcome to have your attorney contact mine. Otherwise, I'd appreciate it if HOA business stayed within HOA boundaries. For 3 long seconds, she just stared at me. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. She wasn't used to being refused. Definitely wasn't used to being dismissed. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped 10 degrees. You're making a mistake, Mr. Dalton. This community has standards. We protect property values. People who don't respect that tend to find life here very difficult. It wasn't quite a threat. Not quite, but it was close enough. I held her gaze and said nothing. Sometimes silence is the strongest response. She turned on her heel and walked back down the gravel path without another word, her steps sharp and deliberate. I watched until she disappeared around the bend, then pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to my real estate attorney, giving him a heads up that the HOA might try something. The second was to a security company I'd worked with during my last posting. By Monday afternoon, 12 compact dome cameras would cover the perimeter night vision, cloud-linked and discreet. Every entrance, every approach recorded. I spent the rest of that Saturday double-checking every document highlighting key protections. The paperwork was airtight. I had nothing to worry about legally anyway. But legality and reality don't always align, especially when you're dealing with someone who believes their authority trumps documented facts. As the sun started to set over the lake, I stood at the water's edge again and watched the light fade. The surface of the water turned from blue to orange to deep purple. It was peaceful, beautiful, exactly what I'd wanted. But I couldn't shake the memory of Marlene's expression when I'd refused her, the cold fury in her eyes, the tight control in her voice. I'd seen that look before in interrogation rooms and hostile negotiations. It was the look of someone who wouldn't let go, someone who'd escalate. I walked back to the house as darkness settled over the property. The night had gone still. No birds, no crickets, just the wind through the pines. My instincts told me this wasn't over, not even close. Marlene Kinsley had backed down today, but she'd be back. People like her always came back. They couldn't stand losing control. As I locked the door behind me and checked the windows, I found myself thinking about the cameras that would arrive Monday. 12 units covering every angle. It felt excessive, paranoid even. But paranoia keeps you alive when the situation turns bad. And something in my gut told me this situation was about to turn very bad indeed. I just didn't know how bad yet. The letter arrived on Wednesday, 3 days after the cameras went live. Plain white envelope, no return address, with Pinewood Hollow, HOA, official notice, printed across the top in bold red letters. I found it wedged into my mailbox when I came back from town with groceries. The paper felt cheap, the kind you'd buy in bulk from an office supply store. I opened it standing there at the end of my driveway, reading, while the afternoon sun beat down on my shoulders. Dear Mr. Dalton, this letter serves as official notice that you are in violation of Pinewood Hollow, HOA Covenant Section 7.3, unauthorized construction, adjacent to community resources. You have 7 days to submit architectural plans for review and approval. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $500 with an additional $100 per day until the violation is corrected. Sincerely, Marlene Kinsley, HOA President. I read it twice, then pulled out my phone and photographed both sides of the document. The timestamp read 2:14 p.m. I'd learned in the Navy to record everything, especially when dealing with people who played fast and loose with facts. Section 7.3. I walked back to the house and retrieved my copy of the HOA covenants from the filing cabinet. The document was 32 pages long, single-spaced, covering everything from fence heights to mailbox colors. I read through it carefully, checking every section number, every subsection, every footnote. Section 7 covered architectural standards. 7.1 dealt with exterior paint colors. 7.2 addressed roofing materials. Section 7 ended at 7.2. There was no 7.3. She'd made it up, fabricated an entire covenant section, and put it in writing, probably hoping I wouldn't bother to check. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Almost. I called my attorney first. He listened while I read the memo aloud, then asked me to email him a copy. This is harassment, he said. Clear cut. She's citing non-existent rules and threatening financial penalties she has no authority to impose. Keep the paperwork. Document everything. If she sends more, we'll have grounds for a restraining order. I thanked him and hung up, then sat at my kitchen table staring at the claim. $500. 100 per day after that. If someone less prepared had received this, someone who didn't have the covenants memorized, someone who trusted that HOA documents were legitimate, they might have just paid. Might have submitted plans, might have given Marlene exactly the authority she wanted. That realization made my jaw tighten. This wasn't just about me. This was her playbook, her standard operating procedure. I thought about what the police officer had said Saturday. She's done this before. Thursday morning, I drove to the HOA management office. It was located in a small strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation service. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, glanced up when I walked in. "Can I help you?" she asked. I handed her the letter. "I received this from Marlene Kinsley. I'd like to speak with someone about the covenant reference." She scanned it, and I watched her eyebrows rise slightly. "Section 7.3. I nodded. "That's what it says." She turned to her computer and typed for a moment, scrolling through what I assumed was a digital copy of the covenants. Her frown deepened. "There's no Section 7.3 in our records. Section 7 only has 2 subsections." I kept my voice neutral. "That's what I found when I checked my copy. So, this notice is invalid." She handed the paperwork back to me carefully, like it might burn her fingers. "I can't speak to that. You'd need to discuss it with Ms. Kinsley directly. But our official covenant documents don't include this section." I thanked her and left, uploading the conversation details to my secure cloud storage along with notes about time, date, and exact words spoken. If this went legal, and I was increasingly certain it would, I'd have a witness who could testify that the HOA's own office had no knowledge of the cited infraction. By Friday afternoon, 3 more notices had appeared on my property, not in the mailbox this time, taped directly to my front gate, yellow paper printed in the same cheap format. Violation notice, improper vehicle storage. My truck was parked in my garage. Violation notice, lawn maintenance below community standards. I moved 3 days ago. The grass was perfect. Violation notice, unapproved exterior modifications. I hadn't modified anything. Each memo cited a different fabricated fine: $200, $300, $150. The amounts were arbitrary, the claims imaginary, but someone driving past might see those yellow papers and assume I was a problem neighbor. That was the point. Public shaming, social pressure. I left the notices where they were and checked my camera footage. 6:22 a.m. Marlene's white sedan pulling up to my gate. Marlene herself stepped out wearing latex gloves, carrying a folder. She moved quickly, efficiently, taping the documents to the metal bars. Her face was calm, focused. No hesitation, no doubt. At 6:25, she climbed back into her car and drove away. I watched the footage 3 times, making sure the timestamp was clear, making sure her face was visible in every frame. Then I called my attorney again. "She's escalating," I told him. 3 more fake notices this morning, all on camera. He was quiet for a moment. "Are you afraid she'll become violent?" I thought about that. "No, she's not the type, but she's not going to stop either. This is about authority and ego. She can't accept that someone in her territory won't submit." He sighed. "Keep documenting. Don't remove the notices yet. Leave them as evidence. And consider filing a police report. Even if they don't arrest her, it creates an official record." Saturday evening, Marlene organized a community meeting. I knew because my neighbor, Mr. Calloway, knocked on my door that afternoon to tell me. He was a quiet man in his 70s, retired from teaching with kind eyes and a cautious manner. "I thought you should know," he said, standing on my porch. "Marlene called an emergency meeting tonight. She's telling people there's a new resident who's violating multiple covenants and refusing to cooperate. She didn't use your name, but everyone knows she means you." I appreciated the warning. "Are you going?" He nodded slowly. "I have to. I'm on the architectural review committee, but Fletcher, I looked at your property lines when you moved in. You're not in the HOA. She knows that. She's just angry you won't bend." I thanked him and watched him walk back down the path. At least one person in this neighborhood understood reality. At 7 p.m., I drove past the community center. Cars filled the parking lot. Through the windows, I could see Marlene at a podium gesturing emphatically. 40 or 50 people in the audience. I didn't stop, didn't go in. I just documented the scene with my phone camera and drove home. Whatever she was saying in there, whatever narrative she was building, it didn't matter. I had the law on my side. I had documentation. I had evidence. She had anger and invented rules. In any real legal confrontation, there was no question who would win. But as I sat in my living room that night, watching the sunset over the lake, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marlene didn't care about legal confrontations. She cared about power, and people who crave power more than consequences are dangerous in ways the law never anticipates. The orange construction fencing appeared on Tuesday morning while I was in town buying lumber. I came back around 11 and found it stretched across the northern section of my property. Bright plastic mesh attached to metal stakes driven into the ground every 10 feet. A hand-painted sign hung from the center, HOA property, no trespassing, pending approval. The fencing blocked direct access to a quarter-mile of my waterfront. I sat in my truck for a solid minute, hands on the steering wheel, letting the anger settle before I moved. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was trespassing, destruction of property, a deliberate physical invasion of space that belonged to me. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency police line while I walked the fence perimeter. The stakes had damaged the grass in several places, leaving torn divots in the soil. Whoever installed this had used a sledgehammer. You could see the impact marks in the dirt. The dispatcher took my information and said an officer would be out within the hour. I hung up and checked the camera footage on my phone, scrubbing backward through the timeline. 7:43 a.m. A white pickup truck I didn't recognize pulled onto my property. 2 men in work clothes climbed out, unloaded the fencing materials, and started installing. They worked fast like they'd done this before. At 8:12, a second vehicle arrived, Marlene's sedan. She stepped out, surveyed the work, nodded approval. The audio was faint, but I could make out her voice. "Make sure it looks official. We need people to think twice before crossing it." One of the workers asked a question I couldn't hear. Marlene's response was clear. "He doesn't own this land. The HOA has jurisdiction over all waterfront access. We're protecting community resources." She stood there for another 5 minutes, hands on her hips, watching them finish. Then she got back in her car and left. The police officer who responded was the same one from my first encounter with Marlene. He walked the fence line with me, checking the stakes, examining the sign. "She did it again," he said, shaking his head. "Third time this year?" I pulled up the camera footage on my phone and showed him. He watched the entire sequence, including Marlene's arrival and instructions. His jaw tightened. That's criminal trespassing, destruction of property, and she's on video directing the workers. That makes her liable. He asked me to email him a copy of the footage, then took photographs of the fence and the damaged grass. "You want to press charges?" I thought about it. Pressing charges would escalate things legally, but it would also put her on official record, create a paper trail, make it harder for her to claim ignorance later. "Yes," I said. "I want to press charges." He nodded. "I'll file the report today. You'll need to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. In the meantime, you have the right to remove this fence. It's on your property without permission." After he left, I spent 2 hours pulling up every stake and rolling the fencing into a manageable bundle. The work was hot, dirty, and frustrating. My hands cramped from gripping the metal posts. Sweat soaked through my shirt, but I documented every step with my phone camera, creating a time-stamped record of the removal process. By 3 p.m., the fence was gone, stacked in a pile near my driveway. I'd keep it as evidence. That evening, I drove to the police station and gave my statement. The officer typed while I talked, asking clarifying questions about property lines, previous interactions, and the camera system. The whole process took 90 minutes. When we finished, he handed me a copy of the incident report. "Ms. Kinsley will be notified that charges have been filed. She'll receive a summons to appear in court. If she contacts you directly, don't engage. Document it and call us immediately." Wednesday morning, I woke to find a new sign posted at the edge of my property. Not on my land this time, just outside the boundary line, visible from the road. "Pinewood Hollow Community Dock. All residents welcome." An arrow pointed toward my waterfront. I walked down to the lake and found 6 people I'd never met standing on my property, setting up folding chairs and a small table, coolers, fishing rods, a portable speaker playing music. They'd made themselves comfortable on land that wasn't theirs. I approached slowly, keeping my voice calm. "Excuse me. This is private property. You're going to need to leave." A middle-aged woman in a sun hat looked up confused. "We were told this is the new community access point. Marlene sent an email yesterday saying the dock was open for resident use." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "There is no community dock. This is my property. It's not part of the HOA. Another person, a man in his 40s, frowned. That doesn't make sense. Why would Marlene lie about that? I pulled out my phone and showed them the survey map, the same one I had shown Marlene weeks ago. This property is outside HOA boundaries. It's privately owned. I'm sorry you were misinformed, but you can't be here. They looked at each other uncertain. The woman in the sun hat started packing her things. We didn't know. We're sorry. Marlene sent a whole email about it with rules and everything. The others followed her lead, gathering their belongings with apologetic murmurs. I watched them leave, then checked my email. Sure enough, there was a message forwarded from one of the departing visitors. Subject line, new community amenity, lakefront access now available. Marlene had sent it to every HOA member. The email claimed that after negotiations with the property owner, limited waterfront access had been granted for community use. Hours of operation, rules about noise and trash, a schedule for reserving time slots. All of it fabricated. All of it designed to create the illusion that she'd won, that she'd forced me to compromise. I forwarded the email to my attorney with a brief note. She's now involving innocent third parties. This needs to stop. He called me 20 minutes later. This crosses several legal lines. Misrepresentation, trespassing by proxy. We can add this to the existing complaint and request an emergency restraining order. How many people showed up on your property? I told him 6. He was quiet for a moment. Fletcher, she's not going to quit until a judge forces her to. I think it's time we file a formal lawsuit, not just a restraining order, a full civil suit for harassment, defamation, and interference with property rights. I stood at my window looking out at the lake. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of orange and red. It was supposed to be peaceful here, supposed to be simple. Do it, I said. File the suit. Thursday afternoon, Marlene called my phone. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I answered her, voice came through sharp and furious. You had me summoned to court. Do you have any idea what you've done? I kept my tone neutral. I pressed charges for trespassing and property damage. You directed workers to install a fence on my land without permission. She ignored that completely. This community has standards, rules. You can't just do whatever you want and hide behind some technicality about property lines. I felt my patience wearing thin. It's not a technicality, it's the law. And if you contact me again, I'll add harassment to the charges. I hung up before she could respond, then immediately called my attorney to report the call. He told me to keep my phone records and not to answer if she called again. But she didn't call. Instead, she sent a letter, hand-delivered to my mailbox that same evening. The envelope was thick, expensive paper. Inside was a single sheet with one sentence typed in the center. You've made a terrible mistake. No signature, no date, just that one line. I photographed it, logged it, and added it to the evidence file. The threat was clear. The escalation was obvious. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I started wondering just how far Marlene Kinsley was willing to go. I upgraded the system on Friday. The 12 cameras had done their job, but after the fence stunt, I needed broader eyes. By evening, 20 units watched every edge of my land linked to encrypted cloud storage. Nothing could be erased. If Marlene tried again, I'd have proof solid enough for any court. Saturday night, I got my proof. 2:17 a.m. Motion sensors triggered on the northern cameras. I was awake. Insomnia had become a frequent companion since this whole situation started, and my phone buzzed with the alert. I pulled up the live feed and watched 2 figures move through the darkness toward my property line. One was unmistakably Marlene, even in the low light. The other was a man I'd seen in one of the camera feeds from the fence installation. They moved carefully, checking over their shoulders, carrying something bulky between them. I zoomed in, surveying equipment, a measuring wheel, a clipboard. They crossed onto my property without hesitation, walking along the waterfront, stopping every 20 feet to take measurements and write notes. The audio picked up fragments of conversation. The man's voice first: if we can prove the lake extends into HOA territory, we can challenge his ownership claim. Marlene responded, the county won't care about his deed if we present evidence that the water line has shifted. Natural boundaries change. We just need documentation showing the lake is community property. I sat in the dark watching them work, my heart rate steady despite the anger burning in my chest. This wasn't random trespassing anymore. This was a conspiracy. They were manufacturing evidence to challenge my legal ownership, creating a false narrative that could drag me into court battles for months or years. My training kicked in the same protocols I'd used in intelligence operations when gathering evidence on hostile actors. Don't intervene. Don't reveal your position. Let them expose themselves completely. I recorded everything. 37 minutes of footage showing Marlene and her associate measuring, photographing, and documenting false data on my property in the middle of the night. At 2:54 a.m., they packed up their equipment and left. I waited until their vehicle disappeared down the road, then downloaded the entire sequence to 3 separate encrypted drives. Sunday morning, Marlene called 911. I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee when I saw the police cruiser pull up. The same officer who had responded to the fence incident stepped out, but his expression was different this time. Cautious, slightly apologetic. "Mr. Dalton, I need to ask you some questions. We received a call about a suspicious person on the property adjacent to yours. The caller described someone matching your description walking around the HOA common areas at odd hours." I set my coffee down carefully. "I haven't left my property in 2 days. I have camera footage proving that." His posture relaxed slightly. "I figured as much. The call came from Marlene Kinsley. She's filed 3 reports this week, claiming you've been harassing HOA residents and trespassing on community land." I pulled out my phone and opened the security app. "Officer, I need to show you something." I handed him the phone with the footage queued to 2:17 a.m. He watched the entire sequence, his jaw tightening with each passing minute. When Marlene's voice came through, clearly discussing falsified boundary evidence, he stopped the video and looked at me. "This was last night." I nodded. 2:17 a.m. until 2:54. They were on my property without permission, discussing ways to manufacture evidence against my ownership claim. "Then this morning she called you to report me for trespassing." He handed the phone back and pulled out his radio. "I need to call my supervisor. This is beyond standard harassment. This is a criminal conspiracy." 20 minutes later, 2 additional patrol cars arrived along with a sergeant I hadn't met before. I showed them all the footage, walking them through the timeline of events over the past 3 weeks. The fake violation notices, the fence installation, the fraudulent community doc email, the threatening letter, and now this nighttime trespassing with intent to fabricate evidence. The sergeant took notes on everything, asked detailed questions about my camera system's specifications, and requested copies of all relevant footage. "Mr. Dalton, I want to be clear about what we're dealing with here. Ms. Kinsley has filed multiple false police reports, trespassed on your property repeatedly, and is now actively conspiring to challenge your legal ownership through manufactured evidence. These are serious criminal offenses." I kept my voice level. "What happens next?" He closed his notepad and looked at me directly. "We're going to pay Ms. Kinsley a visit. Based on this evidence, we have probable cause to question her about the false reports and the trespassing. I can't promise immediate arrest, but I can promise this gets documented officially." They left around noon. That afternoon, I reviewed every file, building a clean timeline of 3 weeks of harassment, each claim backed by video and audio proof. By 4 p.m., the evidence was ready, dozens of clips, hundreds of photos, every piece indexed and encrypted before I sent it to my attorney. He picked up on the second ring. "Fletcher, I just got your package. Give me an hour to review it." When he called back, his voice carried a tone I hadn't heard before. I was impressed, almost excited. "This is the most thoroughly documented harassment case I've seen in 20 years of practice. Every piece of evidence is admissible. Every video has clear timestamps and geolocation data. You've essentially built the prosecution's case for them." I leaned back in my chair. "Will it be enough?" He didn't hesitate. "It's more than enough. The question now isn't whether she'll face consequences. The question is how severe those consequences will be. The false police reports alone could mean jail time. Add the trespassing, the conspiracy to manufacture evidence, the harassment campaign, she's looking at multiple criminal charges, and a civil suit she has no chance of winning." I felt something release in my chest. Not satisfied, not quite. More like the exhaustion that comes after a long mission when you finally know the target has been neutralized. "What do I do now?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "You wait. Let the police do their job. Let the system work. And Fletcher, keep those cameras running. People like Marlene don't go quietly." That night, I stood at my window and watched the lake turn dark under a moonless sky. The water was perfectly still, reflecting nothing. Somewhere across town, Marlene was probably getting a visit from the police, probably being questioned about her activities, probably realizing that her campaign of intimidation had been recorded in meticulous detail. I thought about what my attorney had said. People like her don't go quietly. He was right. This wasn't over. If anything, I'd just backed her into a corner. And cornered people become unpredictable, dangerous. I checked the camera feeds one more time before bed. 20 screens showing 20 different angles of my property. Everything is quiet. Everything's still. But somewhere in that stillness, I could feel the storm building. Monday morning, I met with my attorney to finalize the legal strategy. His office was downtown, tucked into a building that smelled like old wood and law books. We spread the evidence across his conference table, printed timelines, video stills, incident reports, and built the case piece by piece. He'd already filed preliminary motions for a restraining order and civil damages, but now we had enough for criminal referrals. Trespassing, filing false police reports, conspiracy to manufacture evidence, harassment. The list kept growing. "The prosecutor's office will love this," he said, tapping the evidence folders. "You've done 90% of their work for them. Clear documentation, chain of custody, admissible footage. They'll move fast." I asked how fast. He leaned back in his chair. "Days, not weeks. Once they review this package, they'll want to interview you formally. After that, it's up to them whether to press charges immediately or investigate further. But Fletcher, with this level of evidence, I'd be shocked if she's not charged within 72 hours. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Not relieved, not yet, but closer to it. The legal machinery was finally engaging. The system I'd trusted when I bought this property was starting to work. Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Dalton, this is Lieutenant Troy Bannister with the State Police. I understand you've been having trouble with an HOA president." My chest tightened. State Police, that name. "Lieutenant Bannister." His laugh came through warmth and familiarity. "You don't recognize my voice. It's been a while, but I figured a fellow naval intelligence officer would remember his old teammate." The pieces clicked into place. Troy Bannister. We'd served together for 3 years in Naples. He'd been the analyst who could find connections nobody else saw. Smart, thorough, relentless. "Troy, Jesus, I had no idea you were in this area." He explained that he had joined State Police after leaving the Navy, worked his way up to detective, and had recently been promoted to lieutenant. "I saw your name on a cross-reference report this morning. Harassment case involving fabricated evidence and false police reports." I pulled the file and recognized you immediately. Thought I'd reach out personally. I filled him in on everything. 3 weeks of escalation. The camera footage, the nighttime trespassing, Marlene's conspiracy to challenge my property ownership. He listened without interrupting the way he used to during intelligence briefings. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You still document everything the way you did in service," I confirmed. He made a sound of approval. "That's why you were the best at evidence collection. Always 3 steps ahead. Listen, I'm officially taking over this case as lead investigator. The local department has done good work, but this crosses into state jurisdiction now. Can you send me your complete evidence archive?" I told him it was already compiled. 47 videos, 212 photos, complete timeline with annotations. He laughed again. "Of course it is. Send it to my secure email. I'll have it reviewed by the end of the day." Wednesday morning, Troy called back. "I've reviewed everything. Fletcher, this is prosecution gold. We're moving forward with criminal charges, multiple counts. I need you to come in this afternoon for a formal interview. We'll record your statement, verify the evidence chain, and then we're going to pay Ms. Kinsley a visit." The interview took 2 hours. Troy and another detective asked detailed questions about every incident, cross-referencing my answers with the video timestamps. They were professional, thorough, and clearly building an airtight case. When we finished, Troy walked me to the lobby. "We're executing the interview this evening, 6 p.m. I wanted to give you a heads up in case she tries to contact you afterward. Don't answer. Don't engage. Let us handle it." I thanked him and drove home feeling the weight of 3 weeks finally starting to lift. That evening, Marlene organized another protest. I didn't know about it until I heard the voices outside. 15 or 20 people gathered on the public road adjacent to my property. Not on my land this time, but close enough to make their presence known. They held signs. "Protect community values. No to private greed. Save our lake." I watched from my window as Marlene stood at the front, megaphone in hand, leading chants. She was performing, playing to an audience, trying to control the narrative before it slipped away completely. I started recording with my phone, documenting the scene for the record. Then I saw the two unmarked police vehicles pull up. Troy stepped out of the first car, along with another officer in plain clothes. They approached the group calmly, professionally. Troy said something I couldn't hear from my window. The crowd went quiet. Marlene lowered the megaphone slowly. Troy spoke again, gesturing toward Marlene. I could see her face change confusion, then alarm. She shook her head, said something sharp and defensive. Troy remained calm, showing her what looked like paperwork. An official document. The crowd started to disperse, people backing away slowly, uncertain what was happening. Marlene's voice rose angry now. "This is harassment. I'm exercising my right to peaceful assembly." Troy's response was quiet but firm enough that I caught fragments through my open window. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent." The formal Miranda warning. I watched as Troy explained her rights while another officer moved to her side. Marlene's face went white. She turned toward my house, and even from this distance I could see the fury in her eyes. She knew I'd been recording everything, knew the evidence had finally caught up with her. The officer beside her gestured toward the police vehicle. Marlene didn't move at first, stood frozen, megaphone still gripped in one hand. Then slowly, mechanically, she allowed herself to be led toward the car. The remaining protesters scattered quickly, disappearing down the street. Within 5 minutes, the road was empty, except for the two police vehicles. Troy looked up toward my house and gave a small nod, acknowledgement between old teammates. Then he climbed into his car and drove away, Marlene in the back seat. I stood at my window for a long time after they left, watching the empty road. 3 weeks of escalation, 3 weeks of harassment and manufactured violations and midnight trespassing. And now, finally, consequences. Real ones, legal ones. My phone buzzed. Text from Troy. "She's being processed now. Multiple charges, including filing false police reports, criminal trespassing, and conspiracy. You did good work, Lieutenant. Detailed evidence made this case easy." I read the message twice, then set my phone down and walked out to the lake. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. It was quiet again. Peaceful. The way it was supposed to be. But I knew better than to think this was over. Marlene had been arrested, yes. Charged, yes. But people like her don't disappear quietly. They regroup, they escalate, they find new ways to fight back. I'd won this round. The system had worked, but the war wasn't finished yet. Marlene was released after 6 hours of processing. No bail required for the initial charges, just a court date and a warning not to contact me or come near my property. Troy called that night to let me know. "She's out, standard procedure for nonviolent offenses, but Fletcher, she's furious. When we interviewed her, she wouldn't stop insisting she'd done nothing wrong. Keep saying you'd manipulated evidence, that you were the one harassing her. Complete denial." I asked if he thought she'd try something. He didn't hesitate. "Yes. People who refuse to accept responsibility always escalate. Keep your cameras running, document everything, and if she shows up, call me immediately." 2 days later at 11:30 p.m., my power went out. Then the water. I was reading in bed when everything went dark. Simultaneously lights, computer, the hum of the refrigerator, all of it dying at once. I grabbed my phone and checked the backup power supply for the cameras. Still running, battery backup was working as designed. I pulled up the live feeds and switched to night vision mode. The property was visible in grayscale green, every detail sharp. I scrubbed backward through the footage and found them at 11:27. 2 figures approaching from the eastern boundary, moving through the trees to avoid the main cameras. One was unmistakably Marlene, same height, same gait, same purposeful movement. The other was a man taller and heavier. They moved directly to the electrical panel on the side of my house. The man used bolt cutters to snap the lock, then opened the panel and threw the main breaker. Marlene stood watch while he worked. Then they moved to the water shutoff valve near the foundation and closed it completely. The audio picked up their voices. The man spoke first, nervous. "Are you sure about this? The cops just arrested you? If they catch us..." Marlene cut him off. "They won't. No cameras this far from the main house. We'll be gone in 2 minutes." She was wrong about the cameras. I'd installed 3 hidden units in the trees specifically to cover the utility access points. Intelligence training, protect your vulnerabilities first. I watched them finish and disappear back into the woods. Got a clear shot of both faces. Time-stamped, geotagged, admissible. I called Troy immediately. He answered on the second ring voice alert, despite the late hour. "What happened?" I explained the situation. Power and water cut off 2 people on camera, Marlene clearly visible. He swore softly. That's a violation of her release conditions. And whoever's with her is an accomplice. Send me the footage now. I'm calling a judge tonight for an emergency arrest warrant. I sent the files while we talked, watching the progress bar climb on my phone screen. Troy, the man with her, I think I've seen him before. In earlier footage from the fence installation. He was quiet for a moment, typing. Describe him. I gave details, height, weight, clothing, the way he moved. Troy made a sound of recognition. That matches the description of her brother, lives 2 towns over. If it's him, we'll have confirmation from DMV records. He promised to call back with updates and told me to stay inside, keep documenting, but not to confront anyone if they returned. I reset the breakers and turned the water back on, then spent the next hour reviewing all the footage I had of the man. Found him in 4 separate incidents over the past 2 weeks. Always with Marlene. Always during her escalations. He wasn't just helping, occasionally he was deeply involved. By morning I had a complete dossier ready. Every appearance, every action, full timeline. Troy called at 7 a.m. The judge approved the warrant. We're picking her up this morning, her brother too. Fletcher, you need to understand this moves her from misdemeanor territory into serious criminal charges. Sabotage, property damage, violation of court orders. She's looking at real jail time now. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that the system was working, concern about how far Marlene was willing to go, and underneath it all, exhaustion. How much longer do you think this will go on? I asked. Troy sighed. Depends on her. If she takes a plea deal, it could be over in weeks. If she fights it, it could be months. But, Fletcher, with your evidence, there's no way she wins in court. None. A Friday afternoon, I was replacing the cut lock on my electrical panel when I noticed something else. Fresh scratches on the siding near my bedroom window. Someone had tried to pry it open, but failed the security film I'd installed after moving in had held. I checked the cameras and found the attempt recorded at 3 a.m. Thursday, hours after the power incident. Different person this time. Young male, early 20s, wearing a hoodie that obscured his face. He'd worked on the window for almost 10 minutes before giving up. I sent the footage to Troy with a note. Third person now involved. Attempted forced entry. He responded within minutes. This is getting organized. She's recruiting help. I'm recommending enhanced charges and no bail detention at her next hearing. That evening, I drove past the community center and saw another meeting in progress. Fewer people this time, maybe 20 instead of 50. Through the windows, I could see someone else at the podium, not Marlene. The mood looked different, less aggressive, more uncertain. I didn't stop, just documented it and continued home. Saturday morning, Troy called with an update. We arrested Marlene and her brother yesterday, both in custody. She's being held without bail pending Monday's hearing, due to the violation of release conditions and the escalating pattern of behavior. Her brother posted bail, but has a restraining order, keeping him away from you and your property. I asked about the third person, the one who'd tried my window. Still investigating. We pulled DNA from the siding where he gripped it. Should have results next week. But, Fletcher, I want you prepared for something. When we searched Marlene's house, we found files. Detailed plans about your property, photos, maps, notes about your schedule. She's been surveilling you systematically. The information settled in my stomach like cold stone. This wasn't just harassment. This was an obsession. What kind of notes? I asked. Troy hesitated. Plans to force you to sell. Ideas about making life unbearable. Phrases like final solution and permanent removal. Nothing explicitly violent, but the language is concerning enough that we've flagged it for the prosecutor. They're considering adding stalking and intimidation charges. I spent the rest of that day reviewing my own security setup, adding motion sensor lights, installing additional locks, making my property as secure as possible. Not because I was afraid fear was a luxury I'd learned to control in naval intelligence, but because I was practical. Marlene had crossed from harassment into obsession. And obsessed people don't stop until they're forced to. Sunday night, I sat on my porch and watched the sun set over the lake one more time. The water was calm, the air was cool, everything looked peaceful. But I knew the truth. Marlene was in jail, yes. Her brother was under a restraining order, yes. But the machinery of her campaign was still out there. The people she'd recruited, the narrative she'd built, the belief system that told her she was right and I was wrong. That doesn't disappear overnight. It festers, it waits, and when the opportunity comes, it strikes back. I checked my cameras one final time before bed. 20 screens, 20 angles. Everything is quiet, everything recorded. Whatever came next, I'd be ready. Marlene made bail on Tuesday. Against the prosecutor's recommendation, a different judge granted her release with strict conditions: electronic monitoring, no contact with me, and stay within county limits. Troy called to warn me. The ankle monitor tracks her location, but Fletcher, she got out by promising her attorney she'd stay away from you completely. If she violates that, she goes back immediately with no bail option. But people in her mental state don't always think rationally. I thanked him for the heads up and double-checked every camera. Wednesday passed quietly. Thursday too. By Friday, I'd started to think maybe the arrest and bail conditions had finally broken through her denial. Maybe she'd accepted reality. I should have known better. By Friday night, her emails had grown erratic, strange phrasing, late-night timestamps, even one accusing me of stealing public trust. Something in her tone had cracked. Saturday morning, 10:15, I was working in my garage when a vehicle pulled up outside. A sharp knock followed official practice. I checked my phone's camera feed. What I saw made my blood run cold. A woman in a dark blue uniform stood at my door. Marlene. Same height, same stance, but now wearing a fake badge and a tactical vest. Carried a clipboard. Her hair was pulled back severely, and she'd adopted an official posture, but it was definitely her. The men with her I didn't recognize, but they wore matching dark shirts and pants, trying to look like backup officers. One carried what appeared to be toy handcuffs still in packaging. This was insane. She was impersonating law enforcement, a federal crime, and she was doing it on camera. I grabbed my phone and dialed Troy's number while watching the feed. He answered immediately. "Fletcher?" I kept my voice low. "Marlene's at my door right now, dressed as a police officer. 3 men with her. They're trying to look official. I think she's planning to fake arrest me." He swore sharply. "Do not open the door. Keep recording. I'm dispatching units now, state and local. Keep her talking if you can, but stay inside." I moved to the door but didn't open it. Spoke through it instead. "Can I help you?" Marlene's voice came through muffled but clear. "Mr. Dalton, I'm Officer Martinez with the County Sheriff's Department. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding illegal seizure of community property. You need to come with us immediately." I pulled out my backup phone and started recording from inside, capturing audio clearly. "I'd like to see your badge and identification, please." There was a pause. "That's not necessary. The warrant is valid. Open the door now, or we'll be forced to enter." I kept my voice calm, professional. "I'm not opening the door without seeing proper identification and verification of the warrant. If you're legitimate law enforcement, you'll understand that's my right." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear Marlene conferring with the men in urgent whispers, then her voice again harder. "Mr. Dalton, you're obstructing justice. We have authority to use force if necessary." That's when I heard the sirens. Faint at first, then growing louder. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Marlene must have heard them too, because her voice changed, became frantic. "We need to go, now!" Through the camera feed, I watched them scramble toward a large SUV parked at the curb, but they were too slow. 3 marked police cars and 2 unmarked sedans screamed up the street, blocking their escape route. Officers poured out, weapons drawn but pointed down. Troy's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Marlene Kinsley, put your hands on your head. Everyone on the ground now." I watched through multiple camera angles as the scene unfolded. Marlene froze, then tried to back toward the SUV. 2 officers moved to intercept her. She raised her hands slowly, the fake badge glinting in the sunlight. The 3 men with her dropped to the ground, immediately, hands behind their heads. Smart. They knew real law enforcement when they saw it. Troy approached Marlene directly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You're under arrest for impersonating a law enforcement officer, violation of bail conditions, and criminal conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." He read her Miranda rights while another officer removed the fake badge and vest. Marlene's face cycled through expressions: shock, denial, rage, and finally, something close to panic. "I was just trying to serve papers. This is a legal citizen's arrest." Troy's response was cold. "You're wearing a fake police uniform and falsely identified yourself as a sheriff's deputy. That's a federal crime, and you violated a direct court order by coming within 500 feet of this property." By now, a crowd had gathered. Neighbors from the HOA community lined the street watching. Some recorded on their phones, others just stared in disbelief. This was the public showdown I'd never wanted, but Marlene had forced into existence. Troy gestured, and another officer brought out the ankle monitor scanner. They checked Marlene's ankle, confirming the electronic tracking device. Your monitor shows you left your approved residence at 9:43 this morning and traveled directly here. You've been in violation for over an hour. That alone is enough to revoke bail permanently. Marlene tried one last time. He's the criminal. He stole community property. Someone had to do something. Her voice was shrill now, breaking. Troy remained unmoved. Mr. Dalton owns this property legally. You've been shown the documentation multiple times. This is harassment, stalking, and now impersonating an officer. You're done. They cuffed her with real handcuffs and led her to one of the patrol cars. The 3 men with her were also arrested conspiracy and accessory to impersonation. As Marlene was placed in the back seat, she turned and looked directly at my house. Even through the camera, I could see the hatred in her eyes. Pure, undiluted. She truly believed that she was the victim here, that I'd somehow wronged her by refusing to submit to authority she didn't actually have. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Troy approached my door once the scene was secure. I opened it this time. He looked exhausted. You okay? I nodded. Got everything recorded, multiple angles, full audio. He almost smiled. Of course you did. Fletcher, this is it. This is the final straw. Federal charges for the impersonation. State charges for bail violation. She's not getting out again. The prosecutor is pushing for maximum sentences on everything. As the police vehicles pulled away with Marlene in the back, the crowd murmured in disbelief. A few defended her, most just looked uncertain. The story she'd built was cracking. Troy stayed to take my statement, then paused before leaving. You can breathe now. It's over. I wanted to believe him. But years in naval intelligence had taught me nothing ends until every loose end is tied. Still, as the street went quiet, I felt something close to hope. The trial happened 2 months after the impersonation incident. Marlene stood before a federal judge facing 8 charges: impersonating a law enforcement officer, violation of bail conditions, criminal trespassing 3 counts, filing false police reports, conspiracy to manufacture evidence, stalking. The courtroom was packed. I sat in the front row with Troy beside me. The prosecutor presented the case methodically, walking through each incident with corresponding evidence. My camera footage played on large screens for the jury. Timestamps, audio, clear shots of Marlene's face in fake police uniform, the nighttime trespassing, the utility sabotage. Her brother testified as part of a plea deal, confirming Marlene had recruited him and planned escalating actions for weeks. The files found in her house detailed extensive surveillance of my property and schedule. Marlene's attorney argued she'd been protecting community interests, that she genuinely believed the HOA had jurisdiction. The prosecutor demolished that defense with documentation showing Marlene had been given survey maps, the deed, and multiple explanations that my property was outside HOA boundaries. She'd known. She'd simply refused to accept it. When I testified, I described each incident chronologically. The jury watched corresponding video for each event, watched Marlene escalate from verbal confrontation to property invasion to impersonation. The defense attorney tried to suggest I'd provoked her. I kept my answers factual. I asserted my legal property rights. I provided documentation proving ownership. I committed no violations of any law. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all 8 counts. 2 weeks later, the judge delivered the sentence: 18 months in federal prison for impersonating an officer, 6 months concurrent for bail violation, 2 years probation after release, $15,000 in restitution to me for property damage and legal fees, and a permanent injunction barring her from holding any HOA position for life. Marlene stood silent as the sentence was read. Her attorney requested she be allowed to self-surrender in 30 days. The judge denied it. Ms. Kinsley has repeatedly shown she cannot be trusted to follow court orders. She'll begin serving immediately. The bailiff led her away. I watched her disappear into custody. Troy leaned over. It's really over now. This time I believed him. Outside the courthouse, reporters approached me. I kept my statement brief. I simply wanted to live peacefully on property I own legally. When that right was violated repeatedly, I documented everything and let the justice system work. I'm grateful it did. One asked if I felt vindicated. I thought about that word. I feel relieved, I said. relieved that this is finished and I can return to the quiet life I moved here for. The HOA held an emergency meeting the following week. My neighbor updated me afterward. They'd voted unanimously to remove Marlene from all positions and elected a new president. They'd discovered she'd done similar harassment to 3 other families who'd eventually moved away. The community was implementing new oversight procedures and wanted to apologize to me formally. I declined the formal apology but accepted the sentiment. Then I built the dock. Professional construction, 50 feet long, composite decking proper, county permits. 3 weeks and just over $50,000. When finished, it was beautiful. Exactly what I'd envisioned that first morning by the water. I put up a sign, Dalton Private Dock, community access by permission. Then I sent a letter to every HOA household. While this remains private property, I'm happy to extend courtesy access to neighbors who request it respectfully. Please contact me to arrange a signed agreement. There is no fee for good neighbors. Within a week, 12 families reached out. I met with each one, explained simple rules, no littering, respect, quiet hours, supervised children, and signed permission agreements, free of charge. The symbolic reversal was clear but not vindictive. Marlene had tried to claim my property without permission. I was now granting actual access on my terms freely chosen. 6 months after the trial, Troy stopped by for a beer. We sat on the dock watching sunset paint the water gold and crimson. "How's retirement treating you?" he asked. I smiled. "Better now, quiet, peaceful, everything I wanted." He nodded. "When I saw your name on that report, I didn't realize it would become the most documented criminal prosecution I've ever worked. The federal prosecutor used your evidence package as a training example." We sat in comfortable silence. Fishing boats drifted across the lake. Children played on the far shore. Everything was exactly as it should be. Troy eventually asked, "Any regrets? Wish you'd handled it differently?" I thought about the 3 months of harassment, the stress, the constant vigilance. "No," I said. "I didn't look for this fight, but when someone violates your rights, you have 2 choices: submit or stand your ground legally. I chose the law, documented everything, let the system work, and it did." The line floated weightless on the water. A breeze moved through the trees, soft as breath, carrying the scent of pine and rain. For the first time, I didn't think about boundaries or laws or neighbors, just the lake, the quiet, and the simple truth that freedom doesn't need witnesses.
We're QA Stories, and this is just one of many unbelievable tales. Catch more by checking out the next video. We promise it's even wilder.